Thank you. Mr. Speaker, you'll excuse me, I don't have the benefit of a teleprompter, so I have to read it. My apologies. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's budget address is usually a very exciting time for all sectors of the St. Lucian economic landscape. The business sector are anxious to know what plans are there for economic expansion to find out whether the bottom line will improve. The young people look to the changes that will meaningfully impact their lives, and everyone with bated breath await the tax measures that may be in the budget document. Mr. Speaker, this was not the case this year. The public expected the budget to contain the same rehashed promises of hotel construction, transformation of the South to the Pearl of the Caribbean, a new debt-laden airport, and the usual attacks on the opposition. There are others who thought and believed that if any benefits would accrue, they would be to the usual friends, family, and foreigners. There are others who are fed up with the governance of the country. As they see a government where scandals abound, they await the next cover-up, the next round of spin, only to protect a well-connected friend. Mr. Speaker, the people of St. Lucia have been searching everywhere to find the benefits and promises they voted for in 2016. That hope, that dream, that desire for a more secure future has been dampened by pettiness, vindictiveness, and failed leadership. The glitter of ballroom events, numerous empty promises, portrayed at sword-turning ceremonies, the parading of pictures and computerized renderings has done nothing to curb the rising crime rates or the increased cost of groceries at the supermarkets or the rising fuel prices. Mr. Speaker, the hopes and dreams and aspirations of the young people of St. Lucia cannot be fulfilled by this government. And it's time that the government faces the reality that they cannot deliver what the people expect from them. Every interest group is dissatisfied. The police still await the disappearance of impacts. Our nurses are uncertain of their future. Our public servants and teachers await the completion of salary and wage negotiations. The workers of the country are finding it more difficult to secure a decent quality of life. The feeling of hopelessness, fear, and insecurity abounds. Mr. Speaker, this budget does not address the voices of genuine concern being expressed by the majority of St. Lucians. The Prime Minister is living in a world of alternate reality. The St. Lucia he speaks of is not the real St. Lucia. The real St. Lucia is where healthcare is getting worse, cost of living is increasing, and the people have no confidence that the government is transparent in its dealings and will be fair and equitable. It is a St. Lucia where the people will promise a reduction in VAT with a view to its elimination. However, they have only seen VAT reduced by 2.5% and fuel taxes increase by 60%. The fisher folk of St. Lucia know the effect of the 150 increase in taxation. Now, they face an uncertain future with the closure of the Fish and Marketing Corporation. A St. Lucia Labour Party government will reduce the impact of the burdensome fuel tax on the fisher folk of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, this budget presentation of the Prime Minister was simply a repetition of the same old things. It contained the same promises of hotels, DSH, port development, and changes in the financial architecture. Mr. Speaker, none of that has happened. The Prime Minister and his government are single-minded in their desire to discredit the former government of the St. Lucia Labour Party. Even when the facts are obvious, the Prime Minister spins. A review of the economy commissioned by the UWP states that there was improvement in fiscal performance over the years 2012-2016. The Prime Minister refuses to accept. Instead, he prefers to commit what an economist would call economic treason by adding growth figures, and he speaks about cumulative growth. Mr. Speaker, economic growth is never measured by adding figures for the year. Economic growth is measured on an average basis and for a fixed period of time. It is never added. But the Prime Minister, in his quest to show that St. Lucia's economic growth is improving, he commits what I will call again economic treason by adding economic growth figures and saying that is what the economy has expanded or improved by. The Prime Minister insists in undermining and marginalizing the economic management of the St. Lucia Labour Party. I ask, what new economic measures has his government implemented? How many taxes have they reversed? Did he not find enough fiscal space to borrow millions of dollars and a debt to GDP ratio reduced by rebasing by over 12%? Did he have to lay off public servants except when political cleansing was being practiced? Did he not find the near completion of one of the largest hotels built in St. Lucia? Did he not find a regional economy that was improving and hence made it easier for him to borrow long-term on the RSM? Did he not find improved investor confidence worldwide? Did he not find a CIP program that injected over 66 million in the economy and would have performed better if he had not tampered with it? Did the Prime Minister ever consider that the unemployment figures or the employment figures can be related to the migration of many St. Lucians to neighboring islands that are rebuilding after the natural problems and disasters? Did he not find large projects ready to start, but political pettiness caused these projects to be abandoned? Did he not find a CDB financed and approved project that would reduce our carbon imprint by replacing all street lights with energy-saving lights and devices? Did he not find reduction in the unsustainable deficits in the fiscal accounts to surpluses in certain cases? Mr. Speaker, this is only a small part of the platform that his government inherited and failed to build on. Mr. Speaker, we are with the 6 hotels promising every budget delivered by the Prime Minister. It's his habit of promising many hotels. At some earlier times, the Prime Minister promised 6 hotels in Miku. In the 3 years, there has not been one new hotel constructed. However, the Prime Minister wants us to believe that 6 hotels will commence in 1 year. Mr. Speaker, we were promised 500 to 800 jobs on the Deershade sites and a promise to transform the south of the island. It was said that the project would attract 400 horses. And I quote, the high rates of joblessness in Vieux-Fort would be no longer. Mr. Speaker, what has the DSH project delivered to the people of the South, except the partitioning of a substantial part of their land that, according to a framework agreement, measures over 1,000 acres? Mr. Speaker, every year we have fiscal responsibility legislation that will ensure accountability. However, the government continues to award contracts of millions of dollars by direct awards, while a procurement bill already passed in Parliament remains not assented to by the Governor General. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says that the financial rules, the new rules proposed, will control debt accumulation by his government. However, he refuses to act when ministers of his cabinet issue to whom it may concern letters seeking finance that will increase debts. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister plans to merge the National Lottery with the Gaming Authority. I believe that is to allow his adventure into horse race gambling. Who will regulate the business of gambling in St. Lucia if operators are also regulators? Mr. Speaker, all economic policy must be practiced in an atmosphere that fosters good governance, fairness, and equity for all. The people must believe that the system is managed properly and there are adequate checks and balances that will ensure proper ethical practices. Mr. Speaker, the antidote for corruption is good governance. Conversely, when there's an absence of good governance, corruption is alive and well. Good governance must transcend partisan politics. Good governance is about securing public safety, good public education, affordable health care, and responsible debt management. Good governance is also about the Prime Minister exercising leadership by disciplining his ministers when their behavior is in contravention of the ministerial code of behavior. Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister continues to fail the people of St. Lucia by refusing to act when he should in the face of accusations of corruption against a sitting member of his cabinet. This cabinet minister has been publicly accused of offering bribes to a former Prime Minister and cabinet member within the years 2006 and 2011 during the United Workers' Party administration. More disturbing, the accused minister has made no effort to protect his name. Mr. Speaker, there can only be two interpretations to the accused minister's inaction. He either does not care about his public image, which is worrying as a public officer, or is guilty of the accusation. The significance of the accusation remains lost on the Prime Minister, so he has done nothing about it. Not even the fact that the accusation was made by a former cabinet colleague seems to move the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's indifference to matters concerning the behavior of his cabinet ministers is sending a clear signal to the population. He just does not care. And so, we have a situation where certain ministers have become emboldened and are now more and more engaged in activities that are unbecoming of any public official. Mr. Speaker, this government has wasted precious time in Parliament and beyond to blame the opposition, denials, even if obvious evidence. The Prime Minister makes excuses. They have engaged highly paid, tax-funded spin doctors to deflect blame, threaten, and intimidate perceived political opponents. There can be no meaningful economic prosperity for all in that environment. Mr. Speaker, let me say in this House and to the people of St. Lucia that the next SAP government, under my leadership, will strengthen the integrity in public office legislation. The strengthened legislation will ensure that there are sanctions against public officials involved in corruption. Mr. Speaker, this process will commence while we are in opposition, so the people of St. Lucia will see the determination of my party to stamp out corruption in government. Mr. Speaker, allow me to crave your indulgence for a moment in an effort to test how a blameless person would respond to allegations of wrongdoing. If your signature, Mr. Speaker, was attached to a letter you did not sign, and you were then asked about the letter, would you defend its contents? I think not. And you would dismiss the letter as a forgery and perhaps call the police in an attempt to protect your reputation and good name. Mr. Speaker, there is a letter in public circulation which bears the signature of a government minister, in which the government of St. Lucia has agreed to enter into a contractual agreement with Pajoa Limited Associates, and has also agreed to honor debts of EC $162 million for projects undertaken by Pajoa Limited and Associates. Mr. Speaker, it would be irresponsible and reckless of any minister, including the Prime Minister, to commit to anyone the payment of a loan by the government of St. Lucia, which has not been tabled in this House for debate, let alone agreed. Yet, the minister in question has chosen to defend the contents of the letter. The minister has chosen to defend the contents of the letter and has accepted the signature on the letter as being his. He has not suggested forgery, and nor has he been clear that the letter was not written by him. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is aware of the letter and has remained mute about it. By his silence, he is demonstrating an indifference, at the very least, to any likely wrongdoing on the part of his ministers. There is a notable awareness of the seriousness of the matter, though within his own government, by the last United Workers' Party Prime Minister and member for Cashews North. In his answer to questions from the press about the said letter, which was written on the official letterhead from the Ministry of Economic Development, he agreed that the letter, if authentic, then the minister should be disciplined because he would have been in breach of the ministerial code of conduct. Mr. Speaker, I'm calling on the Prime Minister, given the defense of the letter's contents by the minister in question and the recognition by a senior member in his cabinet of the seriousness and damaging nature of the letter, that he tells the House and the people of St. Lucia what he intends to do about the situation. In the spirit of transparency and good governance, that if he, the Prime Minister, intends to commence an investigation into the matter, that the police be included to address any likelihood of forgery of the signature of an important government minister. Mr. Speaker, the tourism industry remains the main economic driver for the country. Our economic success in tourism, though, depends significantly on external factors beyond our control. Example, the state of the economies of our source markets. Mr. Speaker, we note the increase in tourism arrivals and the Prime Minister's claim that is the result of his government's policies. But what has been the government's policy? The dissolution of the St. Lucia Tourist Board, a proposed village tourism initiative, and formation of a TAC, Tourism Advisory Council. None of these initiatives are new. A TAC was appointed before, and I think some members in this Honorable House were members of that TAC. The Tourism Authority has done nothing significantly to change tourism administration, except for the dismissal of employees and officials perceived to be of a different political persuasion. That is all the Tourism Advisory Council, the Tourism Authority has done. Just because people who the government believes were not part of who did not support them, caused them to lose their jobs. Mr. Speaker, the increase in tourism arrivals is due to the improvement of the economies in our source markets, the USA in particular, and the opening of the Royalton Hotel with its own marketing arrangements and its own airline services. Mr. Speaker, the Royalton Hotel increased the room stock by over 400 rooms and the Harbour Club by over 100 rooms. Mr. Speaker, the Royalton Hotel alone accounts for an increase of about 28,072 arrivals. If the Royalton had not opened, growth would only be 2.5% for that year. The 28,000 additional arrivals is a direct result of the additional rooms. If we look at the reduction of figures between 2015 and 2016, you will see that when we lost the Club St. Lucia room stock, arrivals decreased immediately. Mr. Speaker, but I want to warn you and take you to the most recent figures, whilst the government boasts, for the months of February 2019, where arrivals decreased from all major source markets except the United Kingdom. All major source markets, including the United States market, there was a reduction in arrivals in the month of February. And the increase in UK arrivals was only because of cricket being played at the Darren Sammy Stadium. If not, there would have been reductions in all major source markets in February 2019. A worrisome sign, very worrying sign that the government must look into. The St. Lucia Labour Party is concerned with the distribution of the benefits from these tourism numbers. Are the vendors and taxi drivers enjoying increased benefits? Are the arrival numbers reflected in the small hotel sector? The government failed to continue development of the Nature Heritage Tourism Program, but instead chose what they call village tourism, which after 3 years is still at the level of consultancy and proposed legislation. After 3 years, village tourism is still at the level of consultancy and proposed legislation. Mr. Speaker, another example of wasted opportunity. Mr. Speaker, let me briefly make the party's position on Hiwanora International Airport very, very clear. We support the improvement of the airport because it's necessary to meet the demands and standards of a growing destination. Our disagreement with the government is with the financing arrangements for the improvements. We believe that a US $175 million loan is an unnecessary burden on the people of St. Lucia when a debt-free alternative was available. Having cancelled the debt-free alternative, this government has still not been able to finalize the total US $175 million loan. Given St. Lucia's limited fiscal space, it is highly irresponsible to take on debts when it can be avoided and make it more difficult and expensive to secure funding for vital sectors like health and education. Mr. Speaker, if we were to listen to the Prime Minister, you will believe that building an airport was easy, very easy. If it was so, Mr. Speaker, why then are there over 600 airports that are constructed and managed by PPP arrangements? And while, Mr. Speaker, as we speak, hundreds of airports are being constructed using the PPP model. The government of Jamaica has announced the expansion of the Norman Mann International Airport using a PPP model. The Barbados government is seeking a PPP arrangement for its airports, but St. Lucia has chosen the debt option because our Prime Minister can see opportunities when no one else can. It is not that simple, Mr. Speaker, and the Prime Minister must cease from making simplistic arithmetical calculations to explain complex financial transactions. Airport construction is not that simple. To hear the Prime Minister justify imposing a tax burden on the future generation by simply multiplying arrivals by an airport tax is unrealistic and flies in the face of logic. If it was so easy, everybody would just impose an airport tax, arrivals would increase, they would multiply arrivals by the tax and build an airport. And pay it back in 5 years, according to the Prime Minister, and have money for investment. Mr. Speaker, you think if this was so easy to happen, everybody would do it? Why would St. Vincent take years to build an airport? Why would Antigua seek help from the Chinese to build an airport? Why would the Bahamas have a PPP arrangement? Why would Barbados not just increase the airport tax and get money and build the airport? That is the simplicity that the Prime Minister wants to make people understand, that a complex thing like airport development happens. Just put a tax, increase visitors, multiply 45 US by 200,000 and bam, airport. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister must take the business of this country much more seriously. He must. Mr. Speaker, recent political and economic history will show that most Caribbean islands have had to undergo IMF structural adjustment programs or homegrown austerity measures to stabilize their economies to avert economic ruin. These austerity measures have always reduced social, health, and education expenses, causing hardship to large sections of the population, particularly the youth and the lower income groups. In each individual case, the constant factor has been unsustainable high public debt. In St. Lucia, our public debt is over $3 billion, and according to the IMF report of 2018, it is projected to reach 81.3% of GDP by the year 2023. The IMF declared that a fiscal adjustment of 2.7% of GDP was needed to attain the ECCU debt target of 60% of GDP by 2030. The IMF advised, among other measures, the use of CIP revenue for building, and I quote, a savings fund for natural disasters of 5% of GDP by the year 2021. We have heard nothing from the Prime Minister of how he intends to bridge that 2.7% gap needed in the GDP as advised by the IMF. Mr. Speaker, any responsible Minister of Finance would, instead of seeking ways of discrediting this message, would look at the examples of other countries in the region and take measures to limit and avoid unnecessary borrowing. The UWP government will have, by the end of this financial year, borrowed or refinanced nearly $1 billion worth of loans since assuming power in 2016. Mr. Speaker, at the end of 2018, the official stock of public debt increased by 4.1% to $3.306 billion. This year, it is estimated that the public debt will increase by over $300 million without inclusion of the SLASPA guaranteed debt, or over $270 million, expected to increase to over $400 million. Furthermore, the estimates do not reflect the $275 million worth of borrowing approved by the St. Lucia Parliament during the last fiscal year. Only $197 million is reflected in the estimates. Mr. Speaker, if current trends continue, we may see the national debt, including guaranteed debt, reaching nearly $4 billion by the end of the fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, the Barbados economy, which was once hailed as the best managed economy in the region, is, as we speak, under painful restructuring as a result of a severe IMF program, partly because of high public debt. The Barbados population only yesterday experienced increases in bus fares, increased taxes on fuel, thousands of job losses in the public and civil service. Mr. Speaker, if it could happen to Barbados, an economy that we boasted about as being one of the best managed economies of the region, if it could happen to Barbados, Mr. Speaker, and this government continues, when they are told about increased debt, to behave as if the people who are saying it are bearers of bad news and enemies of the people, instead of the government considering that debt is something that you must pursue cautiously, that debt is a burden on our children and on our children's children, that debt must be avoided by whatever means necessary, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the St. Lucia Labour Party would not want our country to have to undergo painful restructuring because of reckless election borrowing from a government that has not implemented one viable economic project since it won the elections in 2016. One. Not one. Not one new and viable economic project from 2016. Mr. Speaker, excessive debt is not only our responsibility, but a burden for our children and generations yet to be born. It is our duty to be responsible. St. Lucia is in danger of experiencing the same kind of debt crisis which has derailed the growth and development of other Caribbean islands, with disastrous consequences for the quality of life of the people. This crisis has to be averted, and the government and the St. Lucia Labour Party, when in government, will design a creative, transparent set of private-public sector partnerships, the avoidance of fiscal excesses, wastage and corruption, and an imaginative growth program that will improve the fiscal position of our country. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister did not elaborate on the fiscal measures relating to the taxes on the tourism sector. Our party calls for some consultation, and that consideration be given to the small hotel sector when the final computations are made. The measures must not be unduly beneficial to large properties that have the benefits of sophisticated accounting procedures. Mr. Speaker, the reintroduction of the property tax must take into consideration the hundreds of house owners who do not have the disposable income available to incur any more taxes. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has announced that a loan from the government of Taiwan will be used to repair roads. As in the case with the government, the impression was given by the Prime Minister that all roads will be fixed. Incidentally, that was the same promise made in last year's budget. What was shocking, Mr. Speaker, is the announcement of a trip to Kuwait for negotiation for repair and construction of the Castries-Grosley Highway and the repair of surrounding secondary roads. Mr. Speaker, you cannot find a more glaring example of how the Prime Minister has wasted opportunity in his blind desire to completely erase the legacy of the St. Lucia Labour Party. What opportunities have the people of St. Lucia lost by the stopping of the Grosley Highway expansion? The project, Mr. Speaker, would be co-financed through approved loans from the Kuwaiti Fund for Arab Economic Development and the OPEC Fund for International Development, OFID, and would have been implemented by the Ministry of Infrastructure. The project included improvement of existing 90 kilometers of secondary roads, widening of the existing two-lane road to a four-lane dual carriageway, upgrading of 7 junctions, pavement strengthening, construction of 9 overhead footbridges, upgrading of draining infrastructure and ancillary structures. Mr. Speaker, in June 2016, the tendered engineering drawings for the secondary roads were being evaluated. The congestion in June 2016, when this government came into power, the engineering works for the secondary roads were being evaluated by public tender in June 2016. The congestion and loss of productive time on that roadway is a direct result of the failure of the Prime Minister to continue the project. And, Mr. Speaker, if you are so minded, I could make it a document of the House. The Shock Bay, Grocery Road, and secondary roads improvement projects from the QET fund. I can make it a document of the House if you're so minded, where all the components and all the other aspects of the roads is outlined in that document. Mr. Speaker, we look forward to what procurement policies that will be used to choose the contractors for the proposed roadworks. Why has there not been a public tender for the construction of these roads? What will be the involvement of the Ministry of Economic Development in the process? Mr. Speaker, if you look on the government's website, that nowhere in that website is there any suggestion of tendering for any project. And this Prime Minister has spoken about these roads, these roads, these Taiwanese roads for many years, and he has not seen it necessary to at least put in public tender the roads that he intends to improve or the roads that he intends to expand. We are waiting, Mr. Speaker, because the Prime Minister must understand that the money being borrowed does not belong to him. This money being borrowed is going to be repaid by the people of St. Lucia, not the Prime Minister. The people of St. Lucia, the young people of St. Lucia, are the ones who are going to be called to pay back on these loans. So the Prime Minister cannot behave as if this is his business. This is not his business. This is the government of St. Lucia, and this is not private business. So he can't expect to just make announcements and believe because he says it, people must listen to it. I call on the Prime Minister to tell us what procurement policies will be put in place for the construction of these roads that are going to be built with the QET funds. How will the contractors be chosen? How will the truckers, how will they be chosen? Mr. Speaker, if we have to look at examples of recent road contracts, this is not very encouraging. The government built roads in Miku, direct award. The government is building a road in Viewfort, a road they say is for the airport, direct awards. The government is building, the government has built walls with special financing, direct awards. Now, the government is about to enter into a loan agreement of over $135 million, and the Prime Minister says that these roads, construction is going to begin in these roads this year, and there has not been one public tender for any of these roads. The government must ensure that the public receives value for money when their funds are being used. Mr. Speaker, if there was ever an example of neglect and carelessness, is in the government's handling of the health sector. The people of St. Lucia have suffered from inadequate health care. Our health practitioners continue to work in less than adequate conditions. The government continues to play politics with the health of the nation. Mr. Speaker, it took the government 3 years to form what the Prime Minister says in his budget is, and I quote, a National Health Insurance Committee to present the best model and financial options to Cabinet, unquote. And 2, to embark upon broad-based consultations with stakeholders. It took the government 3 years to decide that they will form a National Health Committee that will have discussions with stakeholders. 3 years. And when this government came into power, they found in the Ministry of Health broad-based discussions on financing of the health sector. These discussions were put together in a document that is available in the Ministry of Health that gives several options for health financing. The government, again, in its quest to derail the legacy of the St. Lucia Labour Party, cast it aside. And now 3 years later, they are forming a health insurance committee to present the best model and financial options to cabinet. Mr. Speaker, that is as far as we are in national health insurance, a committee and broad-based consultations after 3 years. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister states, and I quote, that it is easy, and he says so very glibly, it's easy to focus on the OKU and St. Jude Hospital. It's not easy, Mr. Prime Minister. It's painful. It's not easy. It's painful. Because the people of the South are seeing their loved ones suffer and some of them die at the George Odlum Stadium. It would be easy if all of us could afford to get on a helicopter when we are sick and fly away. It would be very easy. But it's not so easy for the majority of people in St. Lucia. It is not so easy. So to say that it's easy to focus on the OKU hospital is another sign of callousness. Mr. Speaker, the government remained deaf. They refused to listen while the people of the South cried for health care. According to the estimates presented, the government intends to spend $25 million on the St. Jude Hospital reconstruction project in the next financial year, according to the estimates presented. However, the Prime Minister states that $40 million will be spent, but the estimates, which he passed in the House the week before, says $25 million is going to be spent. And Mr. Speaker, there are several instances where there is a mismatch between the estimates and what the Prime Minister says. The Prime Minister says a figure, and the estimates show a completely different figure. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, in his own words, stated that $10 million US was available for use from the Taiwanese loan for use at St. Jude Hospital. However, he stopped work, even if that $10 million was available, allowing the buildings to get worse, only to admit that the hospital could have been completed much earlier. Mr. Speaker, we begged the government, we demonstrated, we pleaded with the government, we said to the government, do whatever you want. Have all your inquiries, have all your investigations, do what you have to do, play all your politics, but for the sake of the people of St. Lucia, continue work on the St. Jude Hospital. Please, we beg the government, not for ourselves, we beg the government for the people of the South. The government stayed back in their arrogance, casting blame, casting aspersions, threatening, allow the hospital to remain. And now, 46 months later, with an election year, all hell has broken loose. Tractors are moving, etc., and the Prime Minister says that he's going to build a 90-room hospital with $40 million, but the estimate shows $25 million. Mr. Speaker, why did it take the government 36 months to take a decision regarding the health care and welfare of the patients and staff of the St. Jude Hospital? We told the government to do whatever they had to do, but complete the hospital for the people of the South. Mr. Speaker, we have for over 3 years urged the government to continue work even while they performed their political maneuverings. We asked them to continue work, Mr. Speaker. The people in the South demonstrated, but the government was not caring. Now the government is hastily conniving to appear as if something is happening again. The question must be asked, and again we ask, who are the contractors who will work on the St. Jude Hospital reconstruction site? Who are the contractors? Was the award of the contract given by public tender or by direct award? What contractors are involved in the earth moving that is taking place? How were these contractors chosen, and how will the set of contractors who are going to be building the so-called St. Jude reconstruction project, how will they be chosen? Will the construction...
You have 15 minutes in which to complete your presentation. Member for Denminoff.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask for the suspension of 4210 to allow the... Pardon?
Invoke 4210.
Invoke, sorry, 4210 to allow the Honorable Leader of the Opposition an additional 45 minutes within which to complete his presentation.
Honorable members, the question is that Standing Order 4210 be invoked and that the Leader of the Opposition be granted an additional 45 minutes in which to complete his presentation. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Proceed, Honorable.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I move to the OKEU Hospital. Mr. Speaker, there was no mention in the Prime Minister's budget address of the management structure proposed for the OKEU Hospital, even after ministers of his government have openly stated that a contract may have been or will be awarded or has been signed or will be signed for the management of parts of the OKEU Hospital by private contractors. Mr. Speaker, it is total disregard for the people's health when a government can completely abandon commissioning plans prepared from 2016 and fire a committee led by a distinguished doctor who has been honored recently by the government for his distinguished services to medicine. When the government can completely abandon these plans, and what you hear near election time, the government is promises to relocate to the wellness center. The wellness center no longer is the wellness center. It will be relocated. I think what's going to be in the wellness center, all kinds of things. All in a sudden, there's going to be wellness center will be expanded. 40 rooms will be there. A mental hospital in Miku South, a very interesting place to put it. All these things will happen. Suddenly, a mental hospital, in the Prime Minister's budget address, he stated that a mental facility will be built in Miku South. That's what? You want to say it in your budget? You forget what you said, man.
Honorable members, honorable members.
You're losing your memory. Right. Now the government, with election time close, is promising to relocate patients at the wellness center, decommissioning Victoria Hospital, move services to different locations. What confusion. Mr. Speaker, it was the same Prime Minister who said to the country that the OKEU Hospital would serve as a tourist health facility. It's the same Prime Minister who said that the OKEU Hospital would serve as a tourist health facility run by private concerns to supplement income, since the public purse could not afford the maintenance of the OKEU Hospital. The Prime Minister said to the public that the OKEU Hospital would be, part of it would be used as a tourist facility to give health care to tourists, because we should have so many tourists that we would have to have health tourism at the OKEU. The same Prime Minister who said so. Not one word in this budget. Not one word. Not one word. Not one word. Mr. Speaker, the government has failed the public in the provision of health care. There can be no excuse, even for a government that takes no blame. This government is blameless. This government takes responsibility for nothing. This government finds a way to either accuse somebody else or to find excuses. This government takes no responsibility. Only what this government knows is how to make excuses, how to blame the opposition, and how to find ways and means to deflect from the reality. Mr. Speaker, the St. Lucia Labour Party pledges to make affordable health care a priority so as to fulfill the United Nations Declaration that health is a human right. Mr. Speaker, in March 2018, the 45-year-old Folk Research Center burned to the ground with loss of all its invaluable documents and audio-visual materials. To date, the institution has not yet received a report from the fire service on the cause of that disastrous fire. The loss of this unique St. Lucian institution sent shock waves throughout the region. The importance of safeguarding and preserving, and most importantly, the records cannot be re-emphasized, and the fire re-emphasized that fact. An SLP government will give support to the Folk Research Center in the effort to digitalize their records. The St. Lucia Labour Party pledges to work with the Folk Research Center to help rebuild its burnt-out headquarters at Mount Pleasant. The public remains concerned about the treatment of the St. Lucia National Trust, established in 1975. Around the world, national trust organizations safeguard the built heritage and environmental areas that need protection and maintenance. The St. Lucia National Trust should be helped, not hindered in its essential work. The trust will say to all governments and government agencies at times truths that they do not want to hear. But the trust must speak out on behalf of the nation when it sees that our patrimony is seriously threatened. Mr. Speaker, in an act of political retribution and political vindictiveness, the government in its first year of office cut the subvention from the St. Lucia National Trust. The St. Lucia Labour Party pledges again that on its return to office, we will immediately reinstate the subvention to the National Trust. I congratulate our new generation of creative people whose talents were on display during the celebrations of the 40th anniversary of independence. Arts and culture do provide an avenue and outlet for harnessing the energy and real talents of our young people. New areas of film with opportunities for actors, directors, designers, camera persons, sound engineers, etc. should be given serious consideration. Areas like fashion design must be encouraged. Already talented entrepreneurs are doing well with their bags, their clothing, and other accessories. The arts and craft industry must also be encouraged and provided for. We can do so much better in so many areas. These industries and cultural industries will go back on the front burner for further discussion and development when the St. Lucia Labour Party is returned to government. Mr. Speaker, I have no confidence in the budget presented by the Prime Minister. The promised change is nowhere to be found. This budget is yet another heap of empty promises. This budget is a par-ici, par-là budget. Par-ici, par-là. This place and that place. Same thing this year, same thing last year, same thing the year before. 6 hotels, DSH, Newport. This par-ici, par-là budget has no focus, but only reveals the inept, empty, and incompetent nature of the government. A St. Lucia Labour Party government will offer to the people of St. Lucia a new developmental focus within an enabling policy and program environment that will ensure poverty reduction for the promotion and encouragement of micro, small, and medium enterprises, while ensuring the expansion of existing enterprises. The St. Lucia Labour Party program will include 1. An integrated rural development program to help stem some of the rural-urban drift that causes the increasing unemployment, particularly among the youth. 2, a new entrepreneurial culture to enable the expansion of existing enterprises and creation of new ones. 3, a far-reaching reform of the education, training, and human development institutions in our country. 4, improving business facilitation with the aim of making St. Lucia the best place to do business in the Caribbean. 5, the establishment of at least one new major economic sector, that is the alternative energy sector. 6, the St. Lucia Labour Party will be creative, effective in its communication, information sharing, and community engagement that allows ownership and acceptance of the policies and processes by our people. Our agenda will be a people's first agenda. Our agenda will be a people's first agenda, not an agenda for friends, family, and foreigners. The creation of a new emerging economic activity to harness the talent and entrepreneurial aspirations of the youth. The creation of smart cities to facilitate commerce in a highly technological environment. The St. Lucia Labour Party is committed to pursuing a green economy as one of the pillars for inclusive economic growth, sustainable development, and prosperity for all St. Lucians. We will ensure a national understanding and commitment by sharing, explaining, and embracing ideas and strategies that would promote the green economy model. The St. Lucia Labour Party will make a concerted effort to develop an economy with special opportunities for the youth to develop and expand their entrepreneurial talents. In fact, a large part of the new economy will be what the St. Lucia Labour Party will call a youth economy, an economy for the youth. Mr. Speaker, our country must be for the many, not the few. Government policy must be aimed at improving the lives of people, not dividends or profits. We must recognize that the consequences of present government action or inaction can jeopardize the future generations. Mr. Speaker, it was Dwight D. Eisenhower who said, and I quote, "As we peer into the society's future, we, you and our government, must avoid the impulse to live only for today, plundering for our own ease and convenience the precious resources for tomorrow." Mr. Speaker, this country belongs to all St. Lucians. It does not belong to a privileged few. There must be equal opportunities for all people, in spite of their political color. We cannot run a country where every year or every 5 years, 40% of the people are marginalized because it is perceived that they do not support a particular political party. Mr. Speaker, this must end. Our country is going nowhere. This government can stay in the Tower of Babel and make all the promises and say all what they want to say. If you yesterday or if today, if you went to the streets of Castries and asked the man on the Babano bus, what did he gain from the budget pronouncements of the Prime Minister, he will tell you nothing. I challenge you, Mr. Speaker, to go to the streets of Castries and ask the people of St. Lucia, people in St. Lucia, the regular man, not the lucky friend, family, or foreigner, the ordinary man, the man who has to hustle to send his children to school, the man who has to deal with the increased fuel prices that went up only yesterday, the one who has to deal with the 2.6% increase in the consumer price index, the one who was promised a reduction in VAT. The one who was promised 500 jobs at the DSH. The one who was promised 4,000 jobs because of new hotels. If you go to the streets of Castries today and ask them whether the budget did anything for them, they will tell you no. But what the government does, they believe that they can score points, they can score cheap political points by personally attacking their opponents, by not dealing with the reality of the situation, a situation where the people are getting desperate, a situation where the people are dissatisfied, a situation where there is a disconnect between the government and the people. The government will remain in their high and mighty place as kings ruling over subjects and hoping that when they talk here and when they say what they have to say in this chamber, when they insult people, when they are sarcastic, when they are arrogant, they believe that that will solve the problems of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, that will not solve the problems of St. Lucia. St. Lucia is in a state of crisis. St. Lucia is in a state of despair. And this budget has done nothing to create any hope, to improve the aspirations of the young, to do anything that would make St. Lucians believe that when they wake up in the morning, things will change. Mr. Speaker, I have no confidence in this budget. I have no confidence in these pronouncements, and I do not believe they will do anything for the good or for the benefit of the majority of the people of St. Lucia. I thank you.